Today, I'm speaking with Jens Laugesen, a person, creative, with experience to spare, which is like, where do you even start if you look at his resume of work over the last years? Uh, I don't even know how to introduce, but him correctly, and I'm very grateful to speak to him because it seems to me that like luxury branding in the metaverse, fashion was always a big part of it, and like I'd never had a person before to actually speak about it and learn more about it and to really understand the idea of what is fashion in the metaverse, what is phygital products, how is it transforming the products which brands have today. And that's why I'm very happy to speak with Jens Laugesen. Jens, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do in the fashion industry and in the metaverse industry?
Yes, of course, Ken. Ivan, I'm very grateful to do this podcast with you because I think it's a very, very interesting subject. So I have obviously been in the industry for quite a long time, more than 25 years in the industry. I'm initially trained in traditional couture as a fashion designer in Paris. And then I worked a little bit as a fashion journalist. And in the mid-90s, I did then a master's degree in fashion management. So I learned about how you could do marketing in the luxury field. And at the end of the 99, I was in Germany working for a luxury brand. And I realized this kind of old world luxury brands are really not the future. And the way they're working is really not creative. So I wanted to be more creative. And that made me go to London to take a master's in St. Martin's in fashion design. So I got like the more conceptual thinking. So my career was always about shifting when I felt there was need for a shift in my career. And in London, I was basically there to look into what is in fashion after deconstruction. And I came up with a concept of hybridizing things together that was actually inspired by the shift of 9/11, you know, this global crisis that happened in 2001. When the Twin Towers were attacked by the planes. It really made me understand that there was a huge shift starting to change, like the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century. And I still think we're in that post-aftermath of the beginning of the 21st century, which for me, COVID was still like part of that process of reigniting everything. And I think what is happening with the digital now is still started with that event. But it really led me to launch my brand on the Fashion Week. And for 6 years, I was at the London Fashion Week, award-winning designer with a collection that was based more on conceptual thinking than decorative purposes. And I think this is in the fashion industry, in the luxury industry in particular, you have brands who are more conceptualist, and then you have brands who are more like decorating. And I definitely belong more to the first. And before the crash in 2008, I actually put my brand on hold to become a consultant. So when the crash happened in 2008, I was already a consultant in New York working for luxury brand J. Mandel on a luxury ready-to-wear collection. And for the next 15 years, I have been collaborating with many luxury brands around the world, including Calvin Klein Collection, where I was like the London-based design consultant for the creative director at the time. I also worked with bigger conglomerates like LG Fashion Corp in Korea, which belongs to LF Group now, which is the second conglomerate in Korea after Samsung. And for them, I was creative director for one of the luxury brands. I've also worked for smaller brands in Turkey, Denmark, Paris, and Italy. And during the pandemic, I also was able to launch a competition for students around the world because academia has always been a big part of my life. Next to working in industry, I've always been like teaching. And I got the idea at the beginning of the pandemic where I felt really, now this is the time where we have to spend more time in the digital world. And thank God, you know, I had never used Zoom before the pandemic happened. I knew what Skype was, but I didn't like to do Skype calls at the time because I always felt it was a bit weird because nobody was used to having these Skype calls with video. We could see each other. And when you did job interviews, it was always a bit strange. So I never really liked it. But with the pandemic happening, I realized very quickly, I have students next Friday. I have to do a talk online, and I learned to do Zoom like this. And this really made me understand that this Zoom tool was really the most useful thing that happened in the digital transformation in the 21st century. Because I think it made everybody understand that we can communicate digitally, even if we are remotely not next to each other. And I think during the pandemic, people learned to get closeness and emotionality through the digital media, which we didn't have before. And I think through that transition from, which is due to the pandemic, people learned that the digital is not necessarily only a negative, it can also be very positive. And it made many more people, also the older generation, more tech able to use things, set up a Zoom call, learn to do online banking and all these things, and online shopping that they didn't do before. They went to the shops, but then people learned to use it as a tool. And I think because of that, we really see today the transformation of digital in many, many fields where brands are scrambling to understand what it means to be in the digital space. Of course, we had the first digital transformation when brands started to have, like, we didn't have the phones anymore. We got the fax machines, and then we got the internet, we got online shops. Now we have online shops, and then suddenly we talk about metaverse and phygital. And brands who are very traditionally trained have to learn and adapt to this new world of many, many complicated words that are quite alienating. On one hand, you have the traditional brands that are very classical. They think about their consumers, what they sell, the product, the garments, the experiences in the physical world. And then on the other hand, you have the metaverse community, which is very tech forward. They talk about DAOs, they talk about NFT drops, and words that are very complex for ordinary consumers to understand. And many CEOs and marketing directors of companies also have a hard time to assimilate all these kind of digital terminologies that are quite alienating for the main consumer. So I think there is a huge education to do of both the consumer, the brands, the marketing directors, all the stakeholders in the industry of the luxury brands and the fashion brands to see in what degree each brand should or could integrate digital into their new market mechanisms and brand structure.
Well, I fully agree with you. And again, as you mentioned, like, it's important to educate about it. And well, the way I try to help with this, the way I do it for the community is obviously this podcast. But something what I find, and I especially like with fashion brands in the metaverse, like a lot of companies, be it luxury or sports like Nike, do have certain things they do in the metaverse, collections, drops. But to me, and especially my clientele as a marketer, are small to medium-sized businesses, and it always seems that they potentially can understand the metaverse the best because they're more adaptable thanks to their size, but at the same time they have the least amount of resources to actually do anything of any scale in the metaverse because they just don't have their money to spare. And the thing, how do such companies can even enter the phygital products when it's such a heavy investment?
I mean, of course, to do a digital version of your brand and your operation is as time consuming as doing the physical one, I mean, from my own story, I'm a fashion designer, and maybe the audiences have seen, but after these 15 years of doing consultations and collaborations with brands, during the pandemic, I actually relaunched my brand in a very small way. And since a year and a half, I have, with help of the Danish Art Foundation, actually launched like digital collections and online collections that have films. And it's only a year ago when I knew nothing about digital fashion, so I had never done anything myself. And today I've done like 2 online digital and phygital events in London Fashion Week, collaborated with digital designers, actually done AI installations in London Fashion Week. I just come back from Düsseldorf, where my work was being invited to be part of a festival called Strike a Pose Festival in Düsseldorf during like the whole weekend, where like all the museums and galleries kind of showcase products and projects that kind of were around fashion and art. And then I introduced the digital and the metaverse into that. So a year ago, I had never seen how Clo 3D worked. I've never knew anything about doing AR collaborations and stuff like that. So I just, as a small company, I'm self-funded. I don't have any money to pay for all these things. So I'm lucky to have like an online schedule in London Fashion Week, because I'm an on-schedule designer, I have this marketing platform. And because of my experience, that people, when they look at what I've done, I have had collections on the Fashion Week. I work with many brands, they can see what I'm offering to collaborate on is of a certain level. I have been lucky that when I was reaching out the first time to look for digital artists, I just looked at Facebook and Instagram to look for like in different groups of digital artists, of the 10, 15 or 20 artists that I really like the work of, and maybe out of the 20, 6 or 7 came back to me and said they would be happy to collaborate. Because I think everybody in this world are still building, there's not a lot of business yet. The consumers have not accepted it as a way of consuming yet. So for now, the digital assets are being mainly collected by collectors or people who are trying to speculate that they will have a big value in the future. We have, of course, online digital platforms like DressX, and many people do buy them because they think it's a bit fun. But is it a really business yet? I don't think so. But will it be in the future? Probably very, very highly likely to be a very big business in the future. So for the brands who are small brands and medium-sized brands, of course, you cannot do everything, It's time resourcing, and of course, if you're lucky, you want to collaborate with digital artists like myself, then it happens as a collaboration. But if you're a commercial brand that has operations, you will have to pay for all these things. Of course, it is manpower. It is very time consuming. And it's also a new culture to implement. So alongside sustainability, better practice, we have digital communications to do and digital assets to produce. It's a lot of new things to learn. And on top of this, we're being invaded by generative AI, which is kind of transforming the whole market of work. Today, the work as it was yesterday will change for tomorrow. Hopefully, it will be more optimized. We'll have a new kind of work. So I think it's a huge, huge, huge digital revolution that we are in that is as important as the Industrial Revolution was 150 years ago. And I don't even think we know where we're going with this, but it's also a very exciting time, I think, because when times are for change, it's about going with the change and not against the change. But it can, of course, be a bit traumatizing for people, and people can be fearful in these complex times.
Well, yes, I shouldn't be, probably, because I'm young. This is supposed to be, well, like relatively young. I'm not sure if I'm Gen Z or not, but people say that the metaverse is like the Gen Z time. And even I'm very fearful of actually where we're going. Like, not talking about only fashion, but just in general, the AI, the metaverse. One of the things which I'm scared in particularly is what it's going to do with the real human connections. Well, like if we, obviously it's not going to happen like tomorrow, but if we massively adapt ourselves to the fact that we live mostly in the metaverse, so that's how we interact and how we do business and like everyday like social activities, especially with like augmented reality, virtual reality, where does this leave us as people when we try to connect with each other and like talk?
Yeah.
I mentioned it like in a lot of podcasts because that's my major fear, like because I see already social media kind of ruined it for a lot of people or like changed this dynamic.
Yeah.
And like I fear the metaverse will keep the change going.
But we're a bit lucky, because we have kind of a case study of the metaverse that exists since like 15, 20, 25 years, maybe, when we talk about the gamers who have been like living in this metaverse pre where we are now. But the gamers have been living and working and interacting and being in the digital space for like many, many years, where they didn't necessarily see each other in the beginning. They were like on headphones and playing and gaming and talking, But I think the metaverse can be many things. I think what we are doing is also in the metaverse, that's not like Web 2. It's a new way of interacting and connecting. And I do think that having a Zoom call with you and talking with you and seeing you on the screen is much more humanly connected than if we were just talking on the phone, because then you were just hearing each other. I think by seeing the humanity of the person on the other side of the screen really has made us understand that the digital is not just a negative, And for instance, during the pandemic, I was living in England. My mother and my family was in Denmark, and for a year and a half, I could not see my mother, And I think during that 1.5 years of time of pandemic, I actually saw my mother much more than I normally would have done in those 1.5 years living in London and her in Denmark, because when we were talking, I would be calling on the phone. We talk maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes on the phone, and then you might stop. But with the Zoom, we actually could spend longer time and just sit and have a cup of coffee and chat and look at each other. So I think the digital has a human aspect. Actually, it brings us closer. It makes things faster. There's things we can do faster, which is which is good. I mean, the other week I did like an online research. I know how long time it takes to do online research for a new brand project when I work for a client, It takes 2 to 3 days. You have an assistant, you have to collate the links, and they have to cut and paste the text, put it into a document, and then you have like a raw text, then you have to edit that. It's a long iteration process of a text development. I actually asked ChatGPT about helping me with this like 2 weeks ago about my own brand project. I only spent 2 or 3 hours on it. And the amount of work that I got out in a quite structured format would have taken me 2 to 3 days to produce. Of course, you need to check everything with ChatGPT. For sure, you have to. If you don't check, then you end up in really stupid cases. But we are the humans. We are the directors of this. We should direct everything. We should control everything. And we should edit everything. So I think the curators of all this digital production of knowledge that exists online with generative AI, it's very important that the human touch is in there, because otherwise everything just becomes automated writing and images that doesn't really have any purpose or concept or context. So I think the human touch will be very important, but the basic communication of images as we know it from before will not be the same in the future. So there is some jobs that will have to transcend and become something else. And the creators who had maybe before, the creators who could be creative with the hand had a monopoly of doing like illustrations of stuff. In the future, somebody who's just a marketing person, I say just a marketing person, but who have not had any previous artistic education or could express something with a sketch or anything like that, or have ever done a collage, can actually just prompt something to Midjourney and out comes some images that can help that person to communicate what it is they are thinking of. So I think it's liberating the creativity to more people, these tools, in a very interesting way. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how humanity will adapt to this new challenge, because it's definitely a challenge. But hopefully we'll become more productive, and we will be able to use these tools also to resolve all the problems of the world, not just generating more profit for shareholders, but also think about how can these tools find solutions that can help us make the world a better place. I mean, I'm an optimist. We have to be in these times, I think.
Yeah, definitely. What is a phygital product exactly?
So phygital, it's actually an abbreviation of 2 words. It's the physical and digital, the 2 words. We have these 2 poles of the world we're talking about. There's the digital world, which is like the online, the metaverse, the website, anything that's Web3. And then you have the physical world, which is everything that we can touch, the computer, the screen, the clothing, the people, the humanity, the experiences we have in the physical world. So the phygital is just actually trying to blend the 2 worlds, or having a user experience maybe in the physical world that integrates the digital assets into the physical world. So in the beginning, phygital was more useful like user experiences in shops. For instance, a platform like Farfetch, they've been working on a lot of phygital integrations in the physical shops, where people can go to the fashion shops, and then in the shops they will have like apps, inline apps, where they can do like online ordering or size checking or try-ons and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of, I mean, even consumer service on a traditional website, that is the phygital experience, because they use AI to give you like consumer service and things like that. So there's a lot of these kind of generative AI assistance tools we have that existed before. We just didn't know it was generative AI. Google search machine, that's generative AI. It's not what it is today. It's just like a more primitive version of it. So generative AI is not new at all, but it's just since a year, it's been like in the public mind, like this new thing that is really revolutionizing what is happening. So I think the phygital is just like, how can we integrate digital into the physical and have physical into the digital? So, I do think when I go into like metaverse experiences like Sandbox or all these kind of online metaverse platform, I don't particularly like this kind of gaming experience as it is. I do think it's a bit flat. It's a bit gamified. It's a bit cartoony. Where's the emotionality? I don't really see it. Sometimes I do find it beautiful, but sometimes I actually find it's a little bit repetitive and boring, me personally. And also my students, I teach also students in fashion communication at Westminster in London, and I try to integrate the digital thinking into a project I do with them about fashion event management. And when I introduced my digital project from the Fashion Week half a year ago, I asked them, how many of you spend time in these metaverses? Of course, nobody goes ever into Meta, like, because Facebook, that is not really a cool place for young people to be. But like Sandbox or Decentraland and all these places, there was like 2 or 3 of them out of the 30, 40 students I had. And they were the only ones who actually spent time in there. And then I asked them, are you ever going back? And they said, no, why? And because they find it a bit boring, nothing new is happening. So of course, It's a bit like a shopping mall where whenever you go to the shopping mall, you have the same clothes, you have the same garments in the window. It looks the same. Why would you go back? You only go back if you have a purpose. A gamer goes back to play. So an online experience for somebody who wants to go into an online metaverse, why would they go back if there's a new experience to attend, if there's a concert with Beyonce, if there's a fashion show, if there's curation that changes? So I think for now we have a lot of metaverses built, but they're like land, they're like architecture, but there's not much happening inside, you know. So as long as we have more things happening inside, for these things to happen, you know, you have to have small, medium, and larger size companies and designers and creators to be able to build in the metaverse, to create these experiences that users will find really interesting because they're experiences they cannot find elsewhere, in a way where it's easy for them to do too. You know, they can do it on the phone. I think that it's very easy to do on the phone is very important because most people have a phone. Laptop is a bit more complicated and very few people have VR headsets yet. And you know, Apple goggles that just came out yesterday, you know, very few people have those, you know, so we're not there yet so that to be integrated for mainstream. But I think the big challenge right now is for us to integrate the digital in the physical world a little bit more in a very easy to way use for everybody. So even older people, not just Gen Z and young tech savvy people can do it. And so it can be easy for people to see, this can actually be fun to do, and they have a very good experiences with it. And if they have very simple to use experiences to start with, then you will have a bigger integration over the coming years. And then these metaverses will be filled with more experiences. But the problem is, of course, also these experiences, it does cost money to produce. You know, you cannot do everything for free. They have to be cost up, you know, it's salaries, it's build, it's tech time, development time. And development time is very expensive. You know, there are definitely people who have high salaries in this world because so much has to be built.
You mentioned that in your studies in Westminster, you teach your students or you try to implement phygital thinking.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, so say there are companies right now who have a product. What is this phygital thinking they should be thinking about when they're producing their products?
I mean, in a very simple way, you know, for instance, my students are fashion marketing students, you know, so of course, the project I'm doing with them is a fashion event communication project where they have to choose a brand, they have to come up with an event, a fashion related event. That can be anything from a catwalk to an exhibition, to a book launch, to a collaboration, to a pop-up, to a press event. It can be anything that they want. And they have to come up with the ideas of this physical concept, from the concept to the research, to the production, to the execution, to the planning of everything. But then also, once you have a physical event that is local, you know, because the physical event is not global, you know, if it's in London Fashion Week, it's for the people who are in London Fashion Week, so you can only have very limited audiences. I do think it's very important, right, the way we start to think about, okay, of course, a physical event can be on Instagram, so somebody in China or in America can see it too. But what can we use of these tools that exist already to implement easy to use platforms or tools or showroom platforms or versions of what we do that can get into the virtual world, into the digital realm, in the metaverse, not maybe in the metaverse, but in a more digital way. So people can access this on their mobile phones if they're in Africa and around the world. So I think about how can you have like local actions that can have local implications and amplifications, but what can you do to amplify this in a global way, also through the digital media, in a creative way, not just rely on people who sit in the front row of a fashion show to take a picture of the catwalk and then somebody else will see it, or wait for the TikTokers to do their own versions of commentary and things. You know, I think that's a bit the lazy digital marketing. You know, I think it's up to brands to be really creative about what are the tools we have, how can we communicate very quickly with them, and what is the new thing that we are working on. I am, for instance, working with this company, one of my sponsors and partners in Hong Kong, called Virtual Touch, and they are currently, I'm helping them as creative director to help them direct their new concepts so it gets a wider appeal to the audience. And they are currently working on something that I find quite revolutionizing. It's a very simple to use digital gallery platform. So many people have digital galleries that you can look at and find online. You can upload pictures, you can put them on the wall. It's a bit basic. It does exist, and you can have free versions of that. But what they are working on, they actually have something inside that is a a digital fabric manipulator tool that means that you can upload your digital garments or assets inside, or it can be a chair, or it can be furniture, it can be a digital garment. Digital assets that you have, you can upload it very quickly. You upload the file into the platform, you choose a platform showroom that you can customize with the walls, you can put videos on the walls, on the floor, you can really integrate 3D objects, and then you can actually change the fabrics inside this virtual space with the fabric manipulator tool that they have. So you can customize these digital assets and actually use it also as a creative process, like in the design thinking. So you can actually play with the colors in there. So it's a very easy to use tool that people can play with. And they will also be able to use this for minting NFT versions of the designs they do. So it's kind of a new way of being able for everybody in all small, medium-sized companies, they can actually use these tools. And there will be like a free versions with like fewer options to use, and then you can have a small subscription for like more advanced usage of this. But I think, so this is one example of how in the future people, very small companies or immersion designers, they could use these free tools creatively and think about how can we make it look stronger than the basic way of using it. So I think it's up to us, the creatives, to use these tools to make them look really strong and yeah, make them stand out in the world of communication, because it's about what appeals to the consumer and how can we make things look better, you know, and how can we communicate what the brand is about in a way that makes us stand out from the crowd. I think today we can also see many websites look the same. Why do you like one website better than another? It's because it has a strong identity or better layout or these things that communicates better the brand values, you know. So I think when everybody gets access to digital tools, it's about standing out in this kind of mall of visual communication of brand identity. And then that's really up to the brand DNA, identity, and the strength of the creative tool of the people who are behind the brand. How can they communicate this? And I think this is very important in this digital world, because otherwise all the metaverses would just look the same, you know. And then if all the metaverses look the same, why would people go from one to the other, you know? So I think it's really going to be a competition about how can you stand out in this digital world too. Like in the physical world, basically, it's the same.
Well, like I don't know what's your opinion about like social media or like, but you mentioned with like websites. I feel that so initially people like care about it standing out and they work about it, but then you get more tools like Wix or WordPress, which are good tools. They democratize the ability to have a website a lot cheaper. But the problem is you get a lot of subpar work. And especially like one of the reasons why I don't like Instagram at the moment is because there's like a lot of work which is by people who seem to just taking the creativity out of like social media marketing and just like, okay, so those are the types of posts we need to do. This is what we're gonna do, and it all looks the same. And they use Canva, and like you look at it long enough, and you can see the same assets being used over and over again. And
yeah, so because everything looks the same, to stand out, you really have to do something that is exceptional. So I think if everybody has the same access to ChatGPT and Canva to do stuff that looks professional, you know, how can you stand out in that competition? Then you have to step up the game, and the brand has to be stronger, you know. And I think, of course, for the mainstream, you know, it's one thing because everybody has the same tools to produce stuff that looks professional. I mean, what I find really bad about social media right now is like that everything, even Facebook and Instagram, looks like the feed is from TikTok, you know, and everybody believes that it has to be in a certain way. And I don't believe that the people who likes to be on Facebook like to see feeds that looks like they came from TikTok. And definitely I, who liked Instagram in the beginning of the times of Instagram, because I actually saw cool things from my friends. Now, when I look at it, I'm being stuffed with stuff I don't want to look at, like feeds and reels from people with videos with strong. You scroll and suddenly you have this sound coming up and these images you don't want to look at, that you haven't asked to look at. I understand it's free, so you're being forced to see things because it's free. That's the way the algorithms work. But actually, I look less at Instagram now. I post stuff, but I actually don't look anymore, because also when I have like 2,500 followers, there's not that many for a brand like mine. I do follow quite a lot of people. If I look at everything, it will take me too much time, and I never look at everything because it's not there's too much stuff that's being fed to me that I don't want to look at. So yeah. So I think it's a problem that there's so much communication. There's so much shit out there, right? Sorry, I said the right word, but there's too much shit out there. Too much.
That's okay. No, again, I agree with you because like I remember Instagram when it started, and I came to it a bit later, maybe like 3 or 4 years into Instagram's existence, and I would actually again see what my friends do up to, and there were lots of like jokes about like, oh, like them making food pictures all the time and stuff like this, but at least I was kind of connected with my friends, even though I didn't have to speak with them like personally, like message them every day. I could leave a comment or like and like be in the same field of view, I'd say. Right now, I go to Instagram, I don't see my friends anymore. It's just like sponsored content and like just whatever. It's like that's again like
I think that's where they're going to lose at one point, because at one point, I mean, I don't even look at Facebook. I did like Facebook before because family and friends from Denmark and stuff like that. But now when I look at it, I haven't even, because they've changed the algorithm again, I just look at stuff. They send me like, because I'm a fashion designer, they think I want to see campaigns from Dolce & Gabbana and other fashion designers. No, I would definitely not want to look at that, I mean, why? They think I'm a fashion designer. I put fashion content. So I want to see fashion content. No, that's not how it works. So they totally don't understand the consumer, I think. And I think they do feed a lot of things to people that they don't want to see. And at one point, people will just be fed up with it. Apart from the ones who are addicted to it, who's just scrolling. That is a huge problem, that people are being addicted to scrolling, I think.
Well, I had a person whom I knew, and he said once that if TikTok was heroin, he would like inject himself with TikTok all the time. And he was literally sitting on his like in his chair all day, like just scrolling TikTok. Which again, I'm not sure. Again, that's what I'm saying. That's one of my fears. I see what social media is doing with people. Like, I just like, what is going to do? Like, the more tech we get into. But on the other side, digital allows to create stuff which doesn't exist in the real world. What's your stance on digital only or like metaverse only fashion, which breaks the laws of physics and just can be like whatever?
So, I mean, after 25 years in the industry where I have worked for brands, I had my own brand, I've been educating, I've been consulting, I've traveled around the world as a creative director, I've really been invited to fashion weeks around the world too. I've experienced many things, had many honors happen to me. Then the pandemic happened, there was this shift with the digital. I actually thought I would become less creative, that suddenly I would maybe become more like a brand consultant only. So I even worked on a brand consultant website that was mainly focusing on that, like all the people I knew who collaborated with me on work for brands. But actually, in a very interesting way, the pandemic ignited my creativity again. A little bit like my creativity that was ignited when I took the shift from Paris to London. I went to St. Martin's when we had the September 11, because the September 11, the 9/11 really was like, for me, oh, this is the end of the world as we know. This was the realization that this is the end of American consumerism, the monopoly of culture, the beginning of something new, this post deconstruction. That was my quest. What is in fashion after deconstruction? This deconstruction of Margiela. What would the next thing be after we have deconstructed everything? What are we going to do? So I came up with like analogies of taking like found garments that I cut into the seams to analyze them in that kind of deconstruction way. And that was happening at the time when I went to develop some pictures of my work at Jessop's in London, which is like a Photoshop in the days when you took your film, your physical film that you took on your physical camera. You took it out, you went to the Photoshop and you gave it to them for 1 hour development. And 1 hour later, you would come back to pick up the physical images. And then I would put them on the table and then I would physically photocopy these images. So my MA work was always about the physical. There was nothing digital in it. I did have a laptop, but nothing was digital. Everything was in a physical way. And I used a photocopy for doing all my portfolios. There was nothing in it that was Photoshop or InDesign or anything, because I didn't know how to use them. And I still don't know how to use Photoshop, actually. But it was when I went to develop some pictures at Jessop's that I looked up on the screen and I saw the airplanes flying into Twin Towers. and I had this vision, this is the end of the world as we know. And because I was in the process of deconstruction, I realized, this is the Twin Towers being deconstructed. It's on the wall, no, it's on the floor, sorry, into small fragmented pieces. Of course, it's a horrible experience for the world. It's traumatic, it's destructive. But at the same time, I try to look at it as an art experience, what is a bit like children playing with Lego blocks, because I'm Danish, so we talk about Lego. So Lego block come from Denmark, and it actually means play well. It's an abbreviation of like God. So that's what Lego blocks means. It's about playing. So I thought, when you're a little child, you have like a Lego tower. It's on the floor. Somebody turns it down. What does the child do? Maybe they cry a bit, and then they start to build again. And I think this is what we have to do when things are deconstructed, when things are really chaotic. We have to find meaning in this chaos and build this new stuff. So that was really my philosophy about deconstructing and reconstructing again. And with the pandemic, I found the same kind of introspection and deconstructing of the world. And it actually ignited creativity that made me work for 3 weeks on a physical collection of upcycling tailored jackets and shirts and garments that actually made me want to do a collection again. After that, I actually had also taken out my archive pieces from 20 years earlier that was filmed on like club kids in East London in a film studio, where after a year and a half without being outside of the pandemic, they were in the corner of the studio. We documented them wearing my clothes, and I thought, these clothes are from today. And I thought, that's interesting. My clothes were 20 years old, my archive pieces. Young kid clubs from today, they actually think they're designs of today. So I realized my design thing has a universal aspect. It's not related to 20 years ago when they were done. It's about a methodology, about taking fragments and you hybridize and you put things together into objects. And I think this kind of thinking of objects that are recomposed is still a way of thinking that is relevant today, especially in the post-pandemic time. And this is why I think the physical and the digital, you recompose new realities or objects that are in between. And also this idea of being in between, it also stems down to a philosophy that's called metamodernism that I actually developed, that I discovered 6-7 years ago, that is developed by two Dutch theorists called Timothy Vermeulen and Robin van Acker. And they talked about this in-betweenness, the nostalgia of the past and the utter desire for the future, and that this metamodernism that is the postmodernism, it's something that's oscillating between the two. So it's not futurist, it's not retro loving, it's a bit of both. And I always found myself both liking things from the past and loving the idea of the future. And I think this is where we are oscillating now. We're not linear like the modernism was. The modernism was a negating of the past. You painted the walls white and you were in the future. That's what Le Corbusier called Le Loire Ripolin, which was named after a French painting company. So he basically said, you just paint the walls white and you're in the future, negating the past. But that's not how it is today. We can paint the walls white, but there is still behind these white painted walls, there is some past wallpapers that we can transpose into that. So I think today it's much more realistic. It's not black and white, it's more in between. And I think there is this oscillation happening, which I find really interesting with the phygital and the digital and the physical. It's neither physical or digital. It's somewhere in between. And I think when we go forward, things will be more and more merged, of course. And if we want to believe in the idea of the metaverse, we will be more in the digital world, half and half, maybe. But of course, we have a physical body, but it will be interesting to see how this oscillating will happen. And I do think for smaller brands and and designers, you just have to think about what fits your brand purpose and your brand DNA. It's not everybody who should do everything in the same way. And of course, big brands, they have big bodies, so they can spend much more. They can build their own metaverse, LVMH have just built their own metaverse for Louis Vuitton. Of course, they're not going to be in a metaverse with everybody else. So let's see where it goes. I mean, in the digital world, there's also a lot of talking about DAOs. It's a very like post-hippie movement where everybody is collaborating. It's like an economy that's generated by the users, not so much by the corporations. And I do think there's too much monopoly of the corporations in the Web2 system. The ideologies behind Web3 that it should be decentralized, so not belonging to the big corporation, is very positive if that can be implemented. But, people are also trying to make business. So of course there will be corporations taking over, like OpenAI before they were bought by Microsoft. They wanted to be like open source and belonging to everybody. And then, of course, they had to fund this. So they had to sell out to one of the big investors. And by doing that, they did hook up with one of the big corporations. But I have listened to Sam Altman, and he does sound like he still has the philosophies of being fair and thinking about humanity too. But of course, it's very difficult when you work with a big corporation behind you and you have shareholders and you have to deliver results and stuff like that. So that's also like something in between. So I think pure idealist will never exist. It's like in politics, a government is rarely on the extreme left or right. It's always somewhere in the middle, oscillating. I'm Danish, so we come from a company. I said no, from a company and a corporation, a country where we have like 10, 15 parties. So there's never a majority party who is governing. It's always coalitions of 2 or 3 companies or parties who are collaborating to make compromise to govern. So for me, that's quite natural that to decide you have to do compromise. Here in England, they don't like to compromise, so it's a very different thing. America, they don't like to compromise. In Russia, they definitely don't compromise. In China, there's no compromise. In Turkey, there's no compromise, So I think that is the nature of democracy: compromise, collaboration, meeting in the middle, not in the extremes. And I think that's maybe what oscillating is, somewhere around the middle, more or less all the time, but somewhere more to less left or right or up and down,
Have you ever came across augmented reality clothing?
Yes, I have seen. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I basically in London Fashion Week last time, we actually did like an augmented reality collaboration with a company, 2 companies in Berlin. One of them called Style Protocol. So they're actually like a metaverse that works on the idea of interoperability. So they've fundraised, I think they've raised quite a lot of money already. And they're working on the idea that once you acquire an NFT, like a digital object, it doesn't belong just to one metaverse. You can actually have versions of it so it can be used in different metaverses, because right now as it is, the metaverse is a bit like either you are this metaverse, that metaverse, and you cannot take the assets you used in the different metaverses into the other metaverses. So people are really feeling that this idea that any digital assets you have should be able to be used in the different metaverses. That's an interesting thing. And so they introduced me to another Berlin startup, it's called Visions, VZNZ. And they developed like an augmented reality experience of my collection in last London Fashion Week, where people who came to the fashion show, they could download the app, and inside the app, once they had downloaded it, they could actually experience 3 outfits from my collection with like changing surfaces. So, you can kind of scale it on the phone. You can take video screen grabs of the virtual objects in the real world on your phone. So you have videos of it, or you can take like photographs of it too. So yeah, it's something you can see on your phone. So augmented reality is a very easy to use way of seeing, digital assets on your phone. Virtual reality is a bit more complicated because you need to have the glasses. So, it's difficult to do in a collective when you're together with many people, because you don't see the other people when you have the glasses on, or unless if everybody has glasses on, then you can see each other inside the VR glasses. But because it's quite expensive, the VR glasses, not many people have them, so it's only for selected few or the tech nerds for now. But hopefully in the future it will be more democratized, I'm pretty sure.
Well, now with Apple's goggles, it's going to be even more expensive than the ones which they produce. Actually, what do you think about Apple's Vision Pro?
I haven't seen it yet. Well, I saw pictures of it when it came out, was it yesterday or 2 days ago. It looks quite futuristic. Yeah, it looks quite futuristic. I have not tried it on. Okay, so until half a year ago, I have tried several times VR glasses. Maybe it wasn't the right glasses. Maybe the experience wasn't great. I never had like, oh, this is really interesting. Oh, each time I tried it, I'll say, oh, is that it? It's not really good. I said, I don't believe in it. Well, it's not that I didn't believe it. I just hadn't seen an experience that was interesting. But then 8 months ago, I actually met Mark, who is the founder of a startup in London called 8XR. And we were supposed to talk about collaborating together. And he came to my place and said, oh, I didn't know how to introduce this to you, because they work on VR quite a lot. They have a platform where creators come in, they can build their own mini game experiences. And it's quite interesting what they do. And then he showed me the VR glasses, and he just showed me like a very basic 3D puzzle that you can have inside the Oculus system, you know, where you have a little 3D castle like that is put into puzzles, like 3D puzzles that you can put together. And then with the two guns, you're kind of taking them from the ceiling, left and right, and trying to put them together. And I actually found with that one experience, I've only had that one experience, but it still for me was quite meditative. I actually found it really calming. I say, okay, I can see this is actually a place once we can work with these kind of 3D glasses. It was quite interesting because you could kind of take these 3D puzzles, and I don't like puzzles. I never do puzzles. I don't like the flat puzzle. I find it boring. But this 3D puzzle, I found that was quite interesting because you could put them, turn it around, stand it there, let it be, and then you could turn it all around. So this kind of three-dimensionality of it was quite convincing in that experience. So I do think there will be a huge possibility in working in 3D and VR. And I would love to, in the future, if it's possible, to start to drape the garments in 3D, in virtual reality. So I'm currently looking for partners to make it work on a project like that, because I do think there is something really interesting in this way that I could take the knowledge that I have learned in my traditional couture training, how you take flat fabric, cut it out, pin it on around the body with pins, and work with 3D around the body. That kind of craft that I have learned by the hands, how can I transpose that into the digital world? You know, I think that's really when we can learn from what we know in the physical world, bring it into the digital world, and we can, what we learn in the digital world, we can take it out to the physical world. I think then it becomes really interesting because it's a thing that goes both ways. We learn from both sides and we become better at what we learn. You know, we should become better when we learn, I think, not worse. But so that's really something I would like to collaborate on, experiment with, to see how far can this integration go. Because I don't really like the digital just for entertainment or for consumption. I like it as a tool, you know, because I think digital, if it's a tool, then it has really a purpose. If it's just something that produces something for us to look at, okay, then we are consuming. Fine, I understand we have to consume. We consume books, we consume images, we consume films, we consume images, you know. But if it's just for consumption, you know, and then we become addicted to a consumption, I don't think it's necessarily a good. But if it's a tool that can help us create stuff that are really interesting or find solutions to the world, then I think we have really found something with the digital. I mean, it's like a hammer, you know. Before we had the hammer, then how would you put things together, you know? Then we had a screwdriver. Okay, that is better than a hammer for many things. Okay. Then we got a phone. Yeah, okay. Then we got the fax machine. Okay, we got a mobile phone in the 80s. It was big. And now we have a flat phone. It's a computer. And now we have. So whenever there's a new tool that comes, you know, how can it improve our worlds and lives? You know, I think this is what we have to look at. Of course, there's also negatives to it. We can become addicted to it. But I mean, I think anything that has a good has a bad side too. So it's up to us as humans to focus on the good, not on the bad. But the problem is, of course, the corporations want us to be addicted to these things so they can make money on us. That's what it is about, isn't it? The more consumption they can get, the more money they can make, and corporations and shareholders will have profits. So it's a complex game, and unfortunately, it's up to us, the consumer, to become more educated so we make the right choices about our consumption and our free time and space. I mean, I have read many places that right now, you know, the trends in Gen Z is also like people like actually to spend money on good food, go for a walk, you know, things they discovered during a pandemic. You know, it's not only about being online and being addicted. There's also like mental health is something that's really a lot in my students' generations talk. They talk a lot about their mental health. You know, I never talked about mental health when I was young, you know, but we probably had mental health problems, you know. But so the focus on these human needs are maybe there too as a result of this pandemic went through, and hopefully it will leave some traces in the generations to come to help implement the digital in a more humane way too, because otherwise, yeah, it can be dangerous, of course.
Again, I agree. You know, one of the problems I face with the metaverse, and I'm talking about more of like a professional basis. So I do marketing, and for me, it's important when I implement a tool that there is like a return on investment for the clients, and well, they get like even more leads, they get more clients themselves out of it. And again, as you mentioned, it is a tool, but like it doesn't seem that those tools yet have a lot of practical use cases outside of just for the sake of them existing. So they exist. The metaverse exists, but the metaverse itself doesn't really. It's like an addition. It's like it's cool to have, but it doesn't really solve any like problems. There is no like inherent need, or at least even if you can make a case for it, there's no urgent inherent need to do anything in the metaverse. And I really like the idea of what you said because, well, it never occurred to me the fact that we can learn from both ways, because what we can do in the digital is not something we can do at least in the same order as we can do in physical. And from this we can like learn and create better connections of creating again our products, creativity, arts. But again, the big problem I face, and like I had the CEO of one augmented reality company on the podcast before, and I asked her the question like, where does augmented reality go in the funnel of like of in the client's journey, basically? And effectively, the only answer I came up with, even after the podcast and thinking about, is that it's like, okay, it makes the product well phygital, it makes it stand out because it has augmented reality component in it. You can, in theory, sell it for more again because it stands out, but you don't need it. Like, and like, I'm not saying this to be like, oh no, like let's forget about augmented reality, but like I'm saying in like in an exploratory way, because I'm looking there should be a need for it, but at the moment you don't really need it because it doesn't really do much for the main business goal of making money.
I think it's because a lot of what we see, like the NFTs we've seen, are just JPEGs that may move a little bit if we're lucky. You know, if we're lucky, it's like a basic JPEG that moves with some kind of movement. You know, of course, some of the first guys who did NFT arts, you know, were lucky. You know, like the Ape has made a lot of money because he invested them really well. Not many of the other people have made a lot of money. People made a lot of money on the first concept because he had produced all these images on one a day for like that amount of time. All his art is not that interesting, but he was the first to come up with the concepts. Of course, he should have the big artistic value of coming up with that concept. So I think the ape was a brilliant concept. He was the first it worked. You know, I think nouns does work. You know, that is also a concept that works. You know, it has a community around it. You know, the apes has a community around it. People has a community around him. So I think the people who are really innovative and can use these new tools and create something new, innovative that nobody else has thought of, will have relevance, will bring people on board. The people who are, I mean, many people in my community on LinkedIn, for instance, are like flooding the market with mid-journey images of things they have prompted. And they all talk about, have you seen my mid-journey design and this and that? And there are people, most of them are not fashion designers or designers. They are people or marketers who prompt images and suddenly they feel empowered because they can produce images. Yes, they can produce illustrations that are basically the results of a prompt that you make. So of course you have to be clever in markets. You have to be strategic in the way you prompt what it is you want to do. And it's amazing that you can receive so much result from it in so short time. I think it's utterly amazing. But I don't find it there very inspiring. You know, it looks like it's the same artist who's done all the work. It's the same kind of canon of beauty. It's very, very racist, the mid-journey aesthetic. I think everybody looks like supermodels. Nobody looks like real people. It is biased for sure because it's based on these commercial images we see from the commercial catwalks around the world. So when you prompt something, mid-journey will look at all the images that exist, stock images that belongs to other people's design. So of course there is the copyright infringement by loaning or lending or borrowing ideas from others. And then all these ideas are being mishmashed, amalgamated into new images. So is it a creation? Yes. Is it interesting? Not sure. Of course, it's super interesting that we can do that we can produce a prompt, we can write a prompt, and that we can get this kind of results like that. That's super interesting. But that does not mean that what comes out of it is interesting or art. So we will have a lot of written text that is not interesting, that's not done by an author, that will not win a Nobel Prize. We will have a lot of digital art that comes out that is not art, that is just illustrations. So that's interesting that we can do that, but it doesn't mean that it's art. So I think it's about us, the creators, to use these new tools and come up with these new innovative concepts that are conceptually groundbreaking, like deconstruction was, like the phone was, like, you know, people coming up with this concept, I do this every day for that amount of time, and then I have a concept. So I think conceptual art has taught us it's not about what is on the, it's not only about what is on the surface of what it is we're looking at. In art, it's actually the story behind and the storytelling behind. So I think when we have all these images, there's the ones who can defend the images with the story behind, and then there's the ones who can say, oh, I just prompted this, and who can say that you didn't steal this prompt from somebody else. So how can you tell, how can you prove that you're the originator of the prompt that everybody can buy online, or then cut and paste from other people's prompts? You know, that's a bit like, you know, DJs who, I mean, of course you have people who steal other people's ideas and then pretend they're their own, you know. So what is the creation value in all these things? I think this is what we need to have a true discussion about. I think it's creative, yes, but is it interesting? It's not because things are creative that it's interesting. There's a lot of artists. I teach a lot of students who create a lot of stuff. It's not necessarily interesting what they do. They might find it interesting, but that doesn't mean that other people find it interesting, if you see what I mean. So I think it's good that people can express themselves, for sure, because that empowers people. They can express. But that just means that there's more competition, and for things to stand out and become like groundbreaking, we have to up the game for competition. And this is up to the creators to really take these extraordinary tools and use them in ways we don't even expect anymore, you know. So I think that's kind of where we are.
Well, you know, like with the prompts and mid journeys, you mentioned earlier as well that like you can generate ideas, or like me as a non-creative, at least not a professional creative. I do like drawing, to be honest, but like not professional. I can brainstorm those ideas and then show them to the creative, to the artist, and like that's what I want, because like I sort of do this anyway, because again, when I was doing my website last month, I went to my designer and I went to the internet and I searched for like pictures, which again, somebody owns them, right? But, and I said, well, I like those colors on those pictures. I like those motifs on those pictures. So like take it and like see how you can like reinterpret it for like the design we do for the brand. And that's again, something you can just as easily do with like Midjourney, where you just like, I want this color palette in the version of like sci-fi something, and generates ideas, and then you have like it's a mood board, or like yeah, like something like that.
I mean, it's fantastic for like people with websites to populate with images that are not just the basic free stock images you can find around the world, because a lot of websites around the world has the same free stock images. And of course, there's a whole economy of stock photography and illustrations that will disappear, you know, because if we can produce quite advanced like images of our desires of what we want to illustrate without having to rely on only photographs that are done by other people that we have to either pay for or get for free, or make ourselves, you know, then of course that is it's super interesting that we can do that, you know. Of course that is not necessarily groundbreaking art, but it will make that all website won't look the same. They will have different feels, you know, because if you look at images of people working next to a laptop, you know, you often find the same kind of black and white aesthetic with the MacBooks, you know, but where are they very individual? If somebody wants to just say, oh, can you do that yellow green, you know, you can improvise and make your own stuff. So I think actually these things will make things become more individual for the people who have talent to make them individual, you know. The ones who are marketers, who are not very creative, they will just do stuff, and I think that's fine. I mean, the ones who have basic websites with basic stock images, I mean Wix, the whole Wix is amazing. Anybody can do a website that looks professional, but that means that all websites look basic and the same, you know, so they don't stand out. It becomes a little bit boring to look at all the websites that looks that have been done in the same way, you know. So how can so I think, how can you stand out with all these tools? It's getting more and more hard. So, you know, brands who want to stand really out have to be more creative and be more distinct and have a really strong brand identity, and find ways to use the tools to your own advantage to really stand out.
What are your hopes for the future of the industry?
It goes very fast. I think it's about finding out what is your niche in the industry, what is your brand good at? You know, as a brand, what are you here to do? What is your purpose? I think metaverse without purpose will never be a success. The gamers have a purpose in their metaverse. They are there for gaming, you know. So once the brand find out what is their purpose in the metaverse, and consumers find out what can they get out of the metaverse, then it will definitely have a purpose. For now, everybody's tiptoeing around it because it is a new thing. It is for sure the evolution of where things will go. It's up to us to make it interesting, you know, because there's a lot of metaverses launching this year, next year, that's been building for the last 2 years. Right now, we have a lot of metaverse spaces that are empty, that has no community, because they don't do anything interesting inside. With all these other new metaverses coming out, there is nothing happening also, you know, because how many people are producing in the metaverses, you know? So it's really about these metaverse spaces opening up to collaborate with really creative people and giving them the space for free in the beginning to create stuff, because if you don't do that, then you will have empty spaces and nothing happening in there, and then you're competing for the same audience who doesn't want to go because nothing is happening anyway. So I think it is really a time to open the gates and let creators be part of it. But of course, it has to be funded somehow, you know. And I think these metaverses, they have to integrate the cost of funding all these experiences inside, because they cannot expect that brands want to build these things. Small, medium-sized brands will do these things if there's not an audience in their consumer that can give them some revenue immediately. So in the beginning, everybody's building, so there's nobody's going to make money on it for the next 5 to 10 years, I think. There will be a lot of funding. People will be investing in it because they will believe in the future of it. And I believe it's totally true. In 5 to 10 years' time, it will be a huge, huge, huge business. For the next 3 to 5 years, it will not be a huge business, but this is the time to build and be there and find your way and identity in this metaverse, because there's only one way to be in the metaverse, is if you have a purpose to being there as a brand and as a consumer. If there's no purpose, then it has no meaning, and then it doesn't make sense. And I totally agree with you.
That's a great sentiment from you. Well, it was a pleasure having you here today. Where can people find you and get connected and see your work if they want to?
So my website is jenslaugesendesign.com. That's for my design advisory. I also have an Instagram called Jens Laugesen Official. So it's with underscores, Jens_Laugesen_official. That's my Instagram. And LinkedIn, you can also find me as Jens Laugesen. Yeah, this is kind of what it is. I'm also launching a metaverse project. So that's called metasense.world on Instagram. So this is something that I've been launching last London Fashion Week, where I have realized that this is what I'm going to come with my proposal of what my brand could be in the metaverse. So it's going to be a metaverse add-on, but slowly starting to work on the project to build a community, collaborating with a new web agency called Web3 Inspire. The founder has, like me, 25 years plus experience, but in the tech domain of product management and agile coaching and working for governments and universities. And so we're collaborating and trying to build this new platform for the new generation, but in a very small way. You know, I think it has to be small concepts, proof of concept, show that it has a relevance. If it doesn't have a relevance, iterate. So it's this kind of iteration process we have to go through: small, test, try, iterate, find out what works, what doesn't work, find partners, you know, because in these times, there's many startups around the world who are all building, trying to get a space in the metaverse. And everybody knows that it's not the time to make big business yet, unless if you're a big corporation. But all the small and medium-sized metaverse players have to play together and should play together and try to build meaningful projects for them together to find their audiences. And once you have your audiences, then you have a beginning of a purpose to be in the metaverse, and then you can play with the bigger player, and then you can start to build something that has more meaning, that can be funded. But it's a long process, you know, and of course it takes a lot of time and collaborations and perseverance and belief and hard work, and a bit of luck.
Definitely. Well, once again, thank you very much. Thank you for being here, and it was an interesting discussion for me to have.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really love talking to you, so have a great day.
Thank you, you too.